You're going to need to stop work until we get the boundary resurveyed. Dennis Conti didn't look up. He had the wire tensioned between the come-along and the post, one hand on the tool, the other holding the splice. He finished the wrap, set the pliers down on the rail, not dropped, placed, and then turned. The man by the county vehicle had a lanyard around his neck, and the particular stance of someone who had never been told no by anyone wearing a canvas shirt. Dennis looked at him the way a farmer reads a cloud bank, measuring, unhurried. "This is my line of fence," Dennis said. "Sir, I understand that's your position." The man smiled the way bureaucrats smile, patience as a weapon. "Ross Garner, County Land Use. We have a complaint on file about the boundary, and until it's cleared, I need the work stopped." Dennis's fingers released the wire, slowly, deliberately. "All right," he said. Dennis set the wire tool down on the crossbar of the post, placed it, the way you'd set a glass on a good table, and turned to face the man fully. "Dennis Conti," he said, "I own this land." Ross Garner nodded in the way officials nod when they aren't really listening. He had his phone out already, thumbing through something, and he gave the boundary line a look that managed to be both brief and skeptical. "Mr. Conti, I understand you believe the line runs here. What the county has on file may differ from that." Dennis didn't answer. He picked up his work gloves from the post cap, folded them in half, and tucked them into his back pocket. His eyes moved to the wire. Not to Ross, to the wire. It was a good line. 4 strands, tight. The posts set at 8-foot intervals in ground he'd broken himself 3 autumns ago. He knew every post by memory. Which ones had needed double tamping. Which ones sat in soil that ran sandy at depth. He knew the boundary because he'd walked it every morning for going on 6 years. That was the thing about the morning walk. It wasn't about the wire. He'd started it the first full spring after he got out. Before the barn was finished. Before the second field was broken. When the property was mostly weeds and a driveway that disappeared into mud at the first hard rain. He'd walked the perimeter that first morning without any particular reason he could name, and then he'd walked it the next morning, and somewhere in the second week it became the thing he did before anything else. He carried the Bible in his chest pocket, had for years. It was small enough to fit there without pulling the fabric. A pocket New Testament, the cover worn to a pale gray-brown that was close to the color of the canvas shirt itself. He'd had it since before the second deployment. The spine had gone soft. The pages had that particular give of paper handled 10,000 times. At the east corner there was a post he always stopped at. Not the last post, not the highest ground, just a post near a slight angle in the line where the boundary turned about 12 degrees to follow the original survey mark. He'd stop there, pull out the Bible, open it to the page. He didn't read it. Not exactly. He'd read it so many times the words were already present before his eyes reached them. He'd hold it open for a moment in the morning air, the way you'd hold a door for someone, then close it, put it back. He never explained it to anyone. No one had ever asked. He wasn't sure he could explain it anyway. The page was Psalm 91. He'd found it underlined in a Bible left in a forward operating kit. Someone else's hand, someone else's pencil. He didn't know whose. He'd carried the words forward the way you carry something found on a trail. Not yours originally, but yours now, by the fact of having picked it up when no one else was there. "He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty." 6 years of mornings. 6 years of that post, that page, that 12-degree turn in the wire. Now Ross Garner was standing in his field telling him the line was wrong. Dennis regarded the inspector the way he'd regard incoming weather, not with irritation, not with worry, just with assessment. The man believed what he was saying. That much was clear. He had the particular certainty of someone who'd pulled a document that morning and trusted it the way people trust documents. "You'll want to pull the original survey," Dennis said. 1984. The county recorder will have it. He bent down and picked the wire tool back up. He had 4 more posts to check before the light shifted. The engine sound came first. Not the car, the engine. A low hum still a quarter-mile off, somewhere past the curve where the road dipped behind the tree line. Dennis heard it the way you hear a change in weather before the clouds arrive, His hands kept moving on the wire. His eyes didn't. He tracked it by pitch. County vehicle, probably. V6, not a truck. Moving at the measured pace of someone who knew where they were going and wasn't in a hurry because the authority was already built in. He finished the twist on the wire before it crested the rise. When it did, a white sedan with a county seal on the door, he had already set the fencing pliers in the grass and straightened up. Not fast, just done, the way a task completes itself when the timing is right. Ross Garner stepped out with the practiced ease of a man whose shoes were wrong for the terrain and who didn't know it. He had a folder under one arm and the expression of someone delivering information that will be, unfortunately, inconvenient for you. Dennis didn't move toward him. He waited by the post, left hand loose against the wire, not gripping it. That was the thing about Dennis Conti on his own land. He didn't fill the space around him with motion. Other men, told to stop work by a county official, would shift weight, fold their arms, make the small, restless adjustments that telegraph argument before it starts. Dennis breathed. His chest rose once, evenly, and his eyes tracked Ross from the moment the car door opened. Not hostile, not curious, just registering. The way a man gathers information before deciding what any of it means. Dennis Conti? Ross said, coming off the gravel onto the grass with a half-step that wobbled. That's right. Ross introduced himself, explained the complaint, explained the resurvey requirement, explained that work would need to pause, all in one continuous flow of words that had the rhythm of something said many times before. It was the tone of a man who believed patience was a form of authority. Dennis let him finish. Then he said, "This boundary line has been in the same place for 22 years." And that was all he said. No heat in it, no particular emphasis. A fact delivered at the same weight as the rest of the morning. While Ross talked, and Ross did keep talking, pivoting now to the complaint process, to the appeals window, to the neighbor on record who had raised the boundary concern, Dennis's fingers moved along the wire without urgency, testing each strand between posts with a pressure unconnected to anything being said. His eyes, though. His eyes found the road once more without his head turning, assessed the tree line, came back to Ross. Not threat assessment. Not exactly. But something close to the habit of it. The practiced reflex of a mind that had been trained for long enough that it never fully switched off. Even here, even in the flat morning light with dew still on the grass and a county inspector mispronouncing easement. At the far end of the wire line, maybe 200 yards off, the east post stood where it always stood. The post he came to last each morning. The one where the walk ended and the day's first real quiet arrived. He didn't look at it now, but he knew exactly where it was, the way you know the position of something you have stood next to every morning for years. There was a pocket Bible in his chest pocket, worn gray at the spine, soft as cloth. It pressed flat against his ribs as he breathed. Ross was still talking about the neighbor's survey claim. Dennis turned his attention back and gave him the courtesy of his full patience. Ross pulled out his phone with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 100 times and was used to it working. "I've got the county filing right here," he said, turning the screen toward Dennis. Section 4, subsection 9. Any active construction or modification to a boundary line within 6 feet of a disputed boundary requires a halt notice pending resurvey. It's not personal, it's procedure. Dennis looked at the screen, not at the filing. At the screen itself, the flat appraisal of a man who has already understood what's being handed to him. "That line hasn't moved since 1987, Dennis said. "Well, according to Mr. Callahan's survey is 11 inches off the county benchmark at the north corner. Has been since he filed it." Ross blinked. "And how would you know that?" "Because I measured it." The answer sat there between them. Ross turned his phone screen off. He seemed to be recalibrating, deciding whether this was stubbornness or something else. "Sir, with respect, a personal measurement doesn't carry the weight of a licensed survey." "No," Dennis said. "It doesn't." That was it. No argument, no elaboration. He set down the wire tensioner and pulled his work gloves off one finger at a time, folded them together, and tucked them into his back pocket. The motion was unhurried to the point of being strange. Not the unhurried ease of a man with nothing to worry about, but the unhurried ease of a man who has decided how long he is willing to spend on something and is spending exactly that long. Ross kept waiting for the rest of the sentence. It never came. "I still have to issue the notice," Ross said finally. He had the tone of a man who expected this to produce either anger or deflation, and wasn't getting either. "You understand that if you continue working on this line before the resurvey is completed, you could be in violation of—" "I understand what the filing says." Ross stopped. He looked at Dennis more carefully than he had looked at him yet. There was something not quite right about this man, and Ross was starting to feel it the way you feel a room that is slightly too quiet. Dennis wasn't performing calm. He wasn't suppressing anything. He simply wasn't bothered, which was the one response Ross didn't have a procedure for. "I'm going to need to make a records request," Ross said. "Property verification. Just to confirm ownership documentation is current." "You do what you need to do," Dennis said. He bent down and picked up the wire tensioner again. Not defiance, not dismissal. He had given Ross his answer and was returning to his work the way a man returns to a thing that will still be there after every interruption passes. Ross typed something on his phone with 2 fingers, sent it, and looked up. Dennis had the wire seated against the post and was checking the tension with 2 fingers, pressing and releasing, listening to the give of it with an attention turned entirely elsewhere, somewhere Ross Garner didn't reach. There was a small square shape in the left breast pocket of his canvas shirt. Ross hadn't noticed it before. Some kind of book or notebook, small enough to be almost invisible, worn so soft it barely made a shape against the fabric. It moved when Dennis breathed. Ross almost asked about it. He didn't. The morning light was flat and bright across the gravel, and the far posts threw short shadows east. There was no wind. Somewhere in the tree line off the north pasture, a bird was working through the same 3 notes it had been working through for 10 minutes. Ross looked down at his phone. The records request was pending. Dennis had already moved 12 feet down the line. Ross watched him go and felt the particular frustration of a man who has said the right words in the right order and achieved nothing. He looked down at his phone. The county records portal was still loading. The property verification pull he'd initiated 3 minutes ago on Dennis Conti, land parcel 14-7 out of the rural assessor's office. Standard procedure. The kind of request that usually came back in under 2 minutes, with a clean chain of title, a survey date, maybe a lien or 2. He'd run 100 of them. The wheels spun. Ross walked back toward his vehicle, keeping the file under his arm, watching Dennis move down the fence line the way water moves. No wasted effort, no hesitation. The man had set 3 posts in the time Ross had been standing here. Each one dropped into its hole, tamped with a single rod, checked once with the eye. Done. He never looked at the measuring tape twice. It bothered Ross in a way he couldn't place. He tried the portal again. Still loading. He typed the name a second time. Dennis M. Conti, DOB, pulled from the assessor's parcel record, and submitted it. The wheels spun once more, then stopped. Not with a result, with something else. A gray banner Ross had not seen before. He expanded it. The text was terse enough that he read it twice. Subject record restricted. Naval Special Operations Service exemption. Inquiries to this record require authorization at the federal level. Further property information requests regarding this parcel may be submitted through standard county channels. And then a case reference number that began with a prefix Ross didn't recognize, followed by a line that was simply blank, where the service branch summary should have been. He read it a third time. Down the fence line, Dennis pulled wire through a tensioner without looking up. Ross stood at his car and felt the back of something cold move through his chest. He was a county inspector. He issued work halt notices and routed survey disputes and processed easement paperwork. He dealt with names. Names returned results. A name that returned a federal flag, and not a simple exemption, but a naval special operations one, was not the kind of thing that happened when you ran a routine pull on a 71-year-old man fixing a fence in a canvas shirt. He wanted to say something. He had nothing to say. The phone was still in his hand when he heard it. Not loud. A low engine note. Diesel, coming from the east on the county road. moving steadily and without haste. Ross turned toward the sound, out of nothing more than ordinary reflex. Dennis did not turn. His hands kept working the wire, but his head came up a quarter inch. His shoulders, already square, drew the faintest degree back, not like a man startled, like a man who has been waiting and is now simply awake to the fact that what he was waiting for has arrived. The vehicle came over the low rise where the county road crested before the gravel driveway. A dark SUV. Government plates. Ross could see that even at distance. 4-door, riding level, no markings. It moved with the unhurried confidence of something that knew exactly where it was going. It slowed at the driveway entrance. Ross looked from the vehicle to Dennis and back again. Dennis had set the tensioner down on top of the post. He hadn't dropped it. He'd set it, both hands loose at his sides now. The morning light fell flat, and even across the flat land and the long fence line and the gravel, and the only sound was the low crunch of tires turning off the road. The SUV began its way up the driveway. Ross looked at his phone screen again. The gray banner was still there. He had no framework for what was happening, and for the first time since he'd climbed out of his car, he said nothing at all. "The appeals window is 30 days from the date of the filing," Ross said. "I want to be clear about that, Mr. Conti, because a lot of landowners in your situation wait too long and then—" His phone buzzed. He glanced down the way people do when they're mid-thought and expect a text from the office. Something minor. Something that will wait. It didn't wait. The banner across the screen was federal gray, the kind Ross had never seen returned on a routine county pull. He'd filed hundreds of those requests. Property records, deed transfers, sometimes a probate flag, once a zoning lien that kicked back to a state agriculture board. He knew the color codes. He knew the routing stamps. He did not know this one. The text beneath the banner was automated, terse, and entirely without explanation. Subject record restricted under Naval Special Operations exemption. No information available at this classification level. Inquiries. Office of Naval Records, Washington, D.C. Ross read it once. Looked up at Dennis. Looked back down. Dennis had not moved. He was holding a length of fence wire in both hands. Not pulling it, just holding it. The way you hold something you've held 1,000 times while you wait for someone else to finish a sentence you stopped listening to. Ross read it a second time. Naval Special Operations exemption. He tried to put that phrase next to the man in front of him. 71 years old. Canvas shirt faded at both elbows. Boot dust on his denim. A post-hole digger leaning against the corner brace behind him like a walking stick he'd borrowed and not returned. He tried to make it fit. It wouldn't. He opened his mouth to say something, maybe to finish the sentence about the 30-day window, just to have something to say, and that's when the gravel started talking. Not the sound of a county fleet vehicle, not the loose, unhurried crunch of a neighbor turning around in the wrong driveway. This was heavier, steady, moving with the specific, unrushed purpose of something that already knew where it was going. Dennis's eyes found the road before Ross's did. The dark SUV came off the county blacktop and onto the gravel drive at an easy roll. No urgency, no lights. Dust lifted behind it. The flat land on both sides of the driveway offered nowhere to hide and nothing to obstruct. And in the bright morning light, the vehicle was very clearly not from around here, in a way that had nothing to do with its make or color. Ross lowered his phone. The gray banner was still on the screen. He didn't look at it again. The SUV stopped 20 yards short of where they were standing, and 4 men stepped out. They were in kit, not full combat load, but close. The kind of dressed-down field configuration that still leaves no question about what someone does for a living. They moved the way people move when they've spent years making sure their movement never wastes anything. The driver stayed near the vehicle. The other 3 spread slightly, not aggressively, just the natural geometry of men who think in sectors. The one who came forward was not the youngest. He was mid-40s, dark-eyed, a jaw like something quarried, and he walked toward Dennis Conti with his chin level and his pace unhurried in the way that suggested he had been looking forward to this and was not going to rush it now. He stopped 6 feet away. He looked at Dennis the way a man looks at someone he learned from. Not admiration exactly, Something quieter, something older than admiration. "Master Chief," he said. 2 words. That was all. Ross's mouth was still open from the sentence he had never finished. The SUV hadn't fully stopped before the passenger door opened. The man who stepped out first was built the way Dennis had been built 30 years ago, wide through the shoulders, nothing wasted, moving with the particular economy of someone who has spent a long time in small spaces with other men depending on him. His kit was full: plate carrier, medical pouch, radio. The 3 others came out behind him, fanning slightly without being told to, the way you do when a vehicle stops in open ground. Automatic, unconscious. Dennis didn't move toward them. He let the wire hang from his left hand and waited. The first man, the one who had stepped out first, walked directly to him. Not to Ross, not to the car. Straight to the man in the canvas shirt standing next to a half-finished fence post with dirt on his boots. He came without hesitation, the way you walk toward something you've been navigating toward for a while. He stopped 3 feet out. "Master Chief Conti." Not a question, not a greeting exactly, more like an acknowledgement, the kind you offer to something you've been told about but hadn't quite believed until you were standing in front of it. Ross looked up from his phone. The screen was still lit. Whatever was on it hadn't changed. No name, no record. A terse federal restriction notice and a naval special operations exemption that returned exactly nothing. He looked at it again, then at the 4 men in full kit, standing in the gravel driveway of a farm in the middle of flat, empty nowhere. Then at the man in the worn canvas shirt who hadn't moved an inch. Something in Ross's face went through a small, private rearrangement. Not embarrassment, not yet. More like a man who has been explaining a math problem to someone and suddenly notices the other person finished it quietly 3 steps ago. "Oscar Galvin," the first man said. He didn't extend his hand immediately. "We've got a situation, Master Chief. I apologize for coming to your home." Dennis looked at him for a moment. Whatever calculation he ran it fast. "How bad?" "Petty Officer Reyes took field wire in the forearm during an egress 2 hours ago. We dressed it. The dressing is failing. A beat. We're 40 minutes from our nearest medical." Dennis's eyes moved to the SUV. One of the 3 other men had the rear door open. Through the gap, a figure was sitting with his arm braced against his chest, head tilted back. Contaminated? Almost certain. It was a rusty line. Dennis was already walking. Not fast, not slow. The same pace he'd been using all morning. He dropped the wire without looking at where it landed, which was the first careless thing Ross had seen him do, and went straight to the rear of the vehicle, with Oscar 1 step behind him. Ross stood where he was. His inspection folder was still in his hand. He wasn't aware of it. He looked at his phone 1 more time. The screen had gone dark. He pressed the side button and read the restriction notice again. Slowly, the way you read something you don't understand a second time, hoping the words will rearrange into sense. They didn't. He looked up at the 3 operators still standing near the vehicle. They weren't paying attention to him. None of them were. They were watching the man in the canvas shirt lean into the back of the SUV, speaking quietly to the injured man inside. Calm and low and completely certain. The way you speak to someone when you need them to trust you without having time to explain why they should. Ross's arm dropped to his side. The inspection folder bent against his leg. He had come here to establish a boundary. He wasn't sure anymore what kind. "Reyes," Oscar said the name low. Not a call, a statement. The youngest of the 4 had his right arm pressed against his chest, forearm wrapped in a field dressing that was dark and wet in the wrong pattern. Dennis had already seen it. He'd seen it when the doors opened. He crossed the gravel without rushing, but he covered the distance fast. He took Reyes by the wrist, 1 hand only, 2 fingers finding the pulse point below the wrap, and turned the arm slightly toward the light. "How long ago?" "Hour and a half," Oscar said. "Wire puncture. We dressed it on the road." "Entry angle?" "We thought downward." He caught the tip of a strand fence climbing a berm. Dennis's thumb moved 2 inches up the forearm. He pressed. Reyes didn't flinch, trained out of it, but his breathing changed, just barely. "It's not downward." Dennis released him. Wire came in at an oblique. Barb deflected off the radius, and seated closer to the ulnar artery than you think. Your tourniquet is working on the wrong pressure point. You've been slowing drainage, not stopping it. One of the other SEALs, the tall one, dark beard, looked at Oscar. Oscar looked at Dennis. "Barn," Dennis said. "Now." He didn't wait to see if they followed. Inside, the light came through two high windows and smelled of hay and machine oil and something older. Dennis moved to the far wall, pulled a crate from beneath a workbench, and had it open before Oscar got both doors wide. Inside the crate, field suture kit, sealed irrigation bags, a tourniquet rated for arterial pressure, and a roll of packing gauze that had no business being in a farm barn. Nobody asked about it. "Sit him there." Dennis pointed to the bench. Arm flat, palm up. He cut the old dressing off in 2 passes. The wound itself was small. That was the problem with punctures. But the skin around it had the wrong color, in a crescent pattern. And Dennis had seen that crescent before. 30 years of it. Underwater, on raft decks, in spaces no medevac ever reached. "Listen," he said, to Reyes specifically. "This is going to compress an area you won't expect. Your arm is going to want to pull. Don't let it." Reyes nodded. His face was pale, but his eyes were clear. Dennis placed 3 fingers in a configuration that wasn't in any civilian first aid chart, applied graduated pressure along the ulnar tract from 2 inches below the wrist toward the elbow, and held it, not pressing down, pressing in, at a specific angle, the angle that accounted for the tissue compression that happens when a diver's arm is loaded against current pressure. A technique built for bodies that can't be reached by anyone in time. Reyes's breathing steadied. "There," Dennis said quietly. He held the pressure for 90 seconds, released, rechecked the pulse point, then repacked the wound with the gauze. Not wrapped, packed. The gauze seated in a folded configuration that would hold without a tourniquet cutting off circulation to the hand. "Irrigation," he said without turning. The sealed bag on the right. The tall one with the beard had it in his hand before Dennis finished the sentence. He handed it across without a word, watching Dennis's hands, the way a man watches something he knows he should memorize. Dennis irrigated, re-examined the entry angle, and dressed it properly. 4 minutes, start to finish. He straightened and looked at Oscar. "Medevac still needs to come. Artery didn't fully breach, but it's compromised. He needs imaging within the hour. Don't let him use that hand." "Yes, Master Chief." Ross Garner had followed them into the barn without being invited. He was standing near the door, inspection folder hanging loose at his side. He didn't say anything. There was nothing that fit. The SEAL, his name was Torres, was breathing easier. Not well, but easier. His forearm was wrapped in a length of Dennis's own cotton sheeting, the pressure point held by a strip of inner tube from the barn shelf, and the flush of red that had been climbing toward his elbow had stopped moving. Dennis had washed his hands at the barn sink. He dried them on a rag hanging from the wall and walked to the tailgate of his own truck, parked inside the barn door, and sat down on it the way a man sits when the work is done and the body knows it. Oscar came and stood near him, not asking anything yet, just standing. The other 2 SEALs were with Torres. Ross Garner was still near the door. The inspection folder was at his side, and it didn't look like he remembered holding it. After a while, Oscar said, "He's going to be okay." Dennis nodded once. Torres was already talking to the man beside him, something low and dry that made the other SEAL exhale through his nose. Dennis heard it, and his mouth moved at the corner, barely. Oscar looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "Why didn't you ever tell anyone?" Dennis didn't answer right away. He reached into the breast pocket of his work shirt and brought out the pocket Bible, the gray-spined one, worn soft from years of handling. He turned to the page he always turned to, not reading it, the way he never quite read it, and held it open across one knee. The pressed flower inside was flat and pale, the color mostly gone. The page beside it had one verse marked with a faint line, not ink, just the compression of a thumbnail drawn across it long ago, by someone, or someday, that he never named. He looked at the fence post he'd set that morning. It was visible through the open barn door, standing straight in the ground, the wire pulled taut on either side of it. "The fence doesn't care who fixed it," Dennis said. "It just holds." Oscar didn't say anything. Dennis closed the Bible, smoothed the cover once with his thumb, and set it on the tailgate beside him. "I did what I did," he said. "I came home, planted a fence line, got up in the mornings." He paused. "That's the whole story." But it wasn't, and Oscar knew it wasn't, and Dennis knew Oscar knew, and neither of them said anything further about it. Some things get carried without being set down. Some things you don't explain, because the explanation would cost more than you have left to spend. Ross Garner took a slow step toward the barn door. He looked at the fence post. He looked at Dennis on the tailgate, with the worn Bible beside him. His inspection folder dropped out of his hand onto the barn floor, and he didn't bend down to pick it up. He walked out to the fence line, bent down in the dirt, and picked up one of the posts Dennis had laid out that morning. He wrapped both hands around it and held it vertical in the prepared hole, the way you hold something when you are only there to help and you know it. He didn't speak. There was no speech that fit. There still wasn't. Dennis looked at him for a moment. Then he stood, picked up the driver from the tailgate, and walked back out into the morning to finish the fence. Oscar stayed in the barn door, watching. Behind him, Torres said something again, quieter this time. The other seal didn't answer. Through the open field, the light was moving the way it does in the late morning, long and unhurried across flat ground, and the wire caught it where it had been stretched and held. The gravel driveway held the dust a while after they left. Then that settled too. Ross had gone first. No report filed. Folder still on his hood when he drove away. Left there like something he'd decided not to carry anymore. Dennis hadn't watched him leave. There was a post to finish. He walked back to the east line the way he always did. No hurry. The tools were where he'd left them that morning. Wire coil propped against the corner stake. The last post leaning at its angle, waiting to be set right. He worked the bar, packed the base, pressed the dirt flat with his boot in slow, even passes. His hands were dark with the soil by the time he stepped back. The post didn't move. The wire ran taut from it, to the next corner, and the next after that, the whole line holding clean against the sky. He reached into his chest pocket. The Bible was warm from where it had rested all morning. He didn't open it. He just held it a moment, thumb along the worn spine, then put it back. The field was quiet. The fence ran the length of it, unchanged, unannounced, holding exactly what it was supposed to hold.